Armstrong's theory of the novel is distinct from Watts', as she places greater emphasis on the history of female subjectivity and the written word. In Desire and Domestic Fiction, Armstrong argues that the novel serves as a mirror of class conflict, rather than a struggle for power, and the centrality of the personal, feminine, and erotic aspects. She also acknowledges the dominant contribution of women writers in 18th-century novels, which are predominantly written by women. Armstrong's approach to constructing a history of the modern woman involves a synthesis of literary theory, Marxist class consciousness, Foucauldian history of sexuality, and feminism, using each to complement the other. She criticizes Foucault for ignoring gender and the bourgeois feminism of Gilbert and Guber for its lack of historical specificity and perpetuation of the female as victim. Armstrong prefers to use her power as a woman of the dominant class, to name her power as a form of power, rather than disguise it as the powerlessness of others. Armstrong's central thesis is that domestic fiction actively sought to disentangle the language of sexual relations from the language of politics, introducing a new form of political power. In the old political paradigm, people were identified and valued according to their status, lineage, and wealth. After this domestic discursive revolution, first female characters, then real women, and finally respectable persons, were identified by their essential qualities of mind. The literature devoted to producing the domestic woman appeared to ignore the political world run by men. But these strategies that distinguished private from social life and detached sexuality from political history were political, allowing the middle class to achieve hegemony, while pretending to define a separate and female sphere. The personal is the political. This thesis challenges traditional interpretations of the novel, highlighting historical and theoretical issues. While earlier didactic texts like Richard Brathwaite's English Gentlewoman, 1631, and Halifax's Advice to a Daughter, 1688, use political language, they also establish a separate sphere of soft authority, and assign women special power over emotionality and identity formation. Halifax asserts that women are compensated for male domination by their influence in the nursery and their sexual power. Brathwaite's Perfect Gentlewoman transforms her household into a feminine government, where everyone serves with more love than fear. The domestic novel is distinct from most fiction, as social issues and political themes are evident in various works, such as Jacobin novelists Scott, Maria Edgeworth, Dickens, and George Eliot. The domestic novel is different from most fiction, making it difficult to consider its political history. The book is enriched by an impressive range of extra literary materials, including Puritan treatises on domestic relations, Elizabethan proclamations, Locke and Rousseau, the People's Charter, The Descent of Man, and conduct books that brought about the switch from status definition to gender definition, and created the modern feminized individual. Armstrong's historiographical model is discontinuous and revolutionary, always trying to identify the remarkable moment or decisive new breakthrough. Puritanism is both a precursor of the Richardsonian novel and a manifestation of the old order. Pamela proves Richardson's decisive break with both the conduct tradition and the common sort of novels and romances, and the total fusion of novel and conduct book. Conduct literature illustrates Enlightenment epistemology, and the formation of female subjectivity in later 18th century Britain, but it is exemplified by Jacques Dubosc's L'honnête femme.it, might have been more useful to distinguish the precise ideological, generic, and historical dimensions of these didactic texts, rather than invoke the general concept of writing. The notion that one can identify the moment when writing invaded, revised, and contained the household, assumes that such entities already existed before and outside of writing. Armstrong's book on the rise of female authority in the novel is surprisingly reluctant to discuss actual novels from the period generally considered as its rise. A large proportion of her texts, both fictional and didactic, come from the later 18th and early 19th century, with non-fiction dominating. Armstrong offers a powerful and illuminating reading of Pamela's resistance to paranoid conspiracy and class aggression, emphasizing her utter dependency on words in this battle for her very existence. She makes acute observations on the return of political and economic language into a supposedly moral and domestic discourse. Armstrong is absolutely right that forms of language and genres of fiction are inextricably bound up with forms of sexuality. Women authors themselves articulated this connection clearly. Jane Barker deliberately revived the genre term romance, for example, in her fictional campaign against libertine sexuality. Elizabeth Boyd, in contrast, boldly accepted the term novel, correspondingly arguing for a morality that tolerated female as well as male frailties, and creating male characters whose linkage of new sexuality and new language foreshadowed the age of sensibility. Armstrong's thesis would be strengthened by these cases, but in practice, she neglects the resource of women's writing, and muffles the complicated connections between notions of life, tastes of love, words, and new being. She quotes the conventional condemnation of novel and romance as polluting, without exploring contemporary shifts in the conceptualization of these key terms. She promises to show the emergence of a specifically modern form of desire, but in practice defines desire in a way that reduces its specificity and equates it with eligibility for marriage. As a history of sexuality and a political history of the novel, then, this book remains suggestive rather than definitive. In conclusion, Armstrong's book on the rise of female authority in the novel is a powerful and illuminating exploration of the relationship between forms of language, genres of fiction, and forms of sexuality. However, Armstrong's thesis is often criticized for neglecting the resource of women's writing, and muffles the complicated connections between notions of life, tastes of love, words, and new being.